All right, cool. So there's a couple things I wanted to kind of go through really quickly. So this week we or actually for our panelists, I guess we can kind of fill you in. So Sagely, we're partnered with the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing for a number of things and helping with wavelength and growing kind of their team and ability to do continuous delivery and software engineering on the wavelength side. But for the larger wing, we started this digital learning series. We're on a bi-weekly basis. We have a variety of sessions in the kind of area of digital transformation. Usually we do a lecture on Tuesdays with a follow-up workshop on Thursday. And this week we did it a little bit differently. We started with a workshop on Tuesday to kind of uncover some things that could be considered barriers or challenges to moving digital in the DoD or the Air Force. And then we put together this panel with you all to kind of present some of those to you and find out if you all think they are actually myths, or maybe they're just barriers to being in a weird world that we all live in within the DoD. So that's what we're going to do today. And then for folks in the line too, who are kind of here from other parts of the wing, we also have the opportunity, if you want any of our coaches to facilitate workshops or sessions with your teams individually, that opportunity is available to you. The contact information is on the screen here, or reach out to Major Mobley and he can set that up for you. As far as the session here, so I've set up those kind of like those myths. So I'm going to propose them. We'll go through to the panelists and they'll be able to answer them in their own way. If you have separate questions, even outside of the myth format, we'll have some 20 minutes or so at the end. So think about those as we talk. And then use the hand raise feature in Zoom so I know that you have a question, and I'll call on you and you can kind of answer them or ask them. And that will be how we do it. Cool. So to start, let me intro who we have here. I'm really excited about the group that was able to kind of jump on and offer their time to come provide their perspective. The first is Dan Montgomery. So Dan's a head of engineering at Sagely at our company. And he spent the last over a decade at a company called Octo. It's a really big and successful defense services company recently acquired by IBM. And in that space, Dan led Agile and DevOps practices for the entire engineering team. So a lot of expertise there, as well as applying those to a variety of DoD customers, including the Air Force, but also NGA and some others. So a wide-ranging perspective on how some of these things have been implemented across different DoD and Air Force areas. Over 20 years as a software engineer. We also have Captain Rachel Dengler, who has product design background or UX design background, coming out of Kessel Run originally, then moved over to the space world to help lead product at Kobayashi Maru. So again, somebody who's been able to apply and see how product and design practices have been implemented across a variety of defense or Department of the Air Force services in different ways. And she's still active duty. So we want to have active duty flavor here too. So if anybody has any questions about kind of being able to do this work while in uniform, Rachel's a great resource to do that. And then we have, last but not least, Enrique Oti, who's currently the CTO of Second Front Systems, who recently had their Series A, 30+ million. Yeah. So congrats on that. So Second Front, one of the first kind of defense tech startups that's in this kind of new wave of trying to use venture capital for specifically defense purposes, which has been really exciting for those of us in the community. Before that, founder of Kessel Run and the first commander as a colonel in leading that company. He was my boss there. So we have a lot of experience together. He's been a mentor of mine for the last number of years. And before that, actually helped start Defense Innovation Unit as well. So Enrique just goes around and starts successful stuff in this space. So we can ask him about that as we go forward. So pretty diverse group. Appreciate you all joining us. And we will get rolling here. So again, I have this kind of list here of just like statements that I'm going to make. I'll pass it over to a couple of you. We'll kind of mix it up and you tell me if it's a myth or a reality. The first one we're going to do, I think talent management has been top of minds for all of us in kind of getting things rolling, particularly within Wavelength, but probably through the whole wing, right? New wing standing up, a lot of manpower decisions to make. And as we try to kind of grow and build into the organization we want to be, talent management is a really important part of that. So the statement I want to make here, and Rachel, I'll pass this to you first, is you can't get good enough talent into the government to really move the needle in the digital space.
You're going to come out and just say like myth, like big.
Yeah, you want to be aggressive opinion.
Yes, yeah. Big myth. Really, really opinionated statement. From what I've seen and what I got to experience at Kessel Run, and then also what I've gotten to experience on the Space Force side, although I'm still Air Force, there are so many very motivated people in positions in program offices that are looking to understand how to, one, do their jobs better. But then we also have a lot of really, really skilled people with very specific skills. And I'll say UX wise, maybe there are a couple who are interested and curious. And I think a lot of us have a user-centered kind of mindset, but a lot of software engineers, a lot of product managers that don't know that they're product managers yet. They haven't been kind of shown into some of what these specific roles can look like on product teams, or what agile software development can really look like. So they exist. We're not necessarily using them that way. So Kessel Run was a great example. When we showed what these roles could do and we found people to put into them, and then what kind of gave them some skills, gave them some support, enablement, and let them run, we were able to see what they could do. And now I think you're kind of seeing a lot of what they can do now. And a lot of that is a lot of people in uniform, people who are civilians who never thought this is where their careers would go. And I'm one of them, completely in love with these career fields, and able to do this work. So my opinion, complete myth.
Great. Perspectives are important, right? So you've been able to experience this on the ground as a person, hands-on and that sort of thing. Enrique, I'll come to you you probably have a different perspective of trying to build organizations and use these systems and put the people in place. What's your take on the statement that there isn't enough talent available to move the needle in government?
Yeah, it's a myth, but I'm not going to be as strongly worded as Rachel here. It's a myth founded in some reality. And the issue, it's not impossible. You can get incredible talent, both from inside the government and actually just pure outsiders that you bring them in. It just takes a lot of hard work. So for someone who's unwilling to put in the work, this is a reality. Like, oh, I just can't get the talent. Well, that's because you're not exploring all those possible options. But I think the bigger issue, which the question does not address, is can you keep that talent? And I think that's a reality. We cannot keep this incredible talent, whether it's the military people leaving or the civilians who come in and go, oh my gosh, this thing is, it's possibly a dumpster fire. I need to get out now. Like we actually see that happen because I think we're kind of what Rachel said, there's a talent management piece. So even if we put in the hard effort, even if we bring everyone in, which we can get the talent, we have to figure out how to manage that talent and give them the appropriate level of responsibility. It doesn't matter what the rank is. Doesn't matter if they came as a GS7 straight out of college. If they're good, use them as that expert that they are. Don't say, oh, you're GS7, you're making coffee. Let's use people for what they're good at and get them excited about the work, about the job, and let's keep that talent.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. I tend to agree. I think there's Josh Marcuse, formerly of the Defense Innovation Boards at Google now. He has this great kind of talking point where he talks about filling your suitcase in your career. And in modern employees, we tend to move around a lot, right? Different experiences. So like maybe the new approach to being a government employee is like, you do a few years in, you go to some commercial company, learn some new things, you come back again. And we have to be okay with that to figure out how to make the system allow for that kind of change and that sort of thing, where like traditionally we like optimize for a 20-year civilian career, which maybe isn't feasible with the modern workforce. So cool, I appreciate that those perspectives. I want to shift, we're going to go all over the place. I want to shift gears to some more product development or value delivery kind of questions. Dan, I'm going to start with you on this one. I'm going to go to all of you here though. One of the things that we often dealt with for people who live in like user-centered design worlds, right? We really want to make sure that we are focusing and on our user's perspective. On Tuesday, we used a lot of design thinking techniques, right? To talk through some of the challenges we were going to do, which means that we're kind of focused on the user's needs. So my statement here is maybe a counter to that. We can't rely on users' feedback solely because they don't have enough context from the wider needs of the mission.
Yeah, I think I'm interested to see what the rest of you think about this. I actually think this is true, and the reason I say that, it's users aren't the only thing that is important, right? The business is important, the mission is important. So when we rely solely on our users, we neglect the good of the whole. And we were actually talking about this about yesterday with some specific examples. I'm actually going to lean on. There's a book on my shelf by Mark Schwartz, who is the former CIO of USCIS, and it's called The Art of Business Value. And he talks about this concept a lot, not necessarily in government, but when you're running a business, right? You have users and you have a business. You have a need to make money, and those two things in an ideal world align, but they rarely do, right? You have users that want things and you have a business that needs things. So I think user input, user feedback is extremely important, but I would argue that it is no more important than the needs of the business or the needs of the mission or the organization at large.
Enrique.
Yeah, I agree. This statement is true. You can't rely solely on the users. There's one of my favorite TV shows is House. I think I'm binge watching it for like the second or third time now. And he always makes a statement like everybody lies. And it's not that people are lying, it's people often are saying things that may not be true, may not be accurate because they don't see that larger context, as kind of Dan mentioned there, because there's a mission context, there's an operational context, there's a business context. I think good designers, and man, I saw some amazing designers at Kessel Run. We had designers who probably knew the doctrine better than their own users. We had people at KR that I think could have taught at the AOC schoolhouse. Like that is the kind of thing you need from a designer. Like you can ask the users, great, but you also need to know operational level of war. You have to know strategy. You have to know policy. You have to know doctrine. And putting that all together, now you can actually deliver something that meets what the user's asking for, but sometimes the user doesn't understand why the system's the way it is. And you can give them what they need still within that wider context. So you're not upsetting everyone else or not violating certain rules or policies or warfighting doctrines. And so I actually totally agree with this statement.
And the designer's perspective.
I hope it's not shocking to say like I completely agree. I think that's exactly kind of what you experience as a UX professional. There's a balance. If we're making the assumption that we have learned the behavior patterns, the domain, the environment completely perfect in a discovery phase, if you even get a discovery phase in your project, if we have learned that perfectly, then maybe we can rely a little bit more on our users' feedback kind of when we're testing out our product later on as development continues. But I don't think we're ever in that perfect situation. And so there's, I think, always something to learn. I think that's why we're always iterating. And I think when we say that, we're not necessarily just talking about going back and going to the same users. We're looking for different perspectives. We're looking for the SME who has done this for years, who's maybe seen it on the outside now. We're looking for their leadership. We're looking for the other people who are involved in this mission, and we need to get those perspectives. And a lot of times designers, when we're looking to understand the problem spaces, we might focus on a few users at the beginning or a few types of roles at the beginning. And that really means that later on, we have to remind ourselves that we have to come back to this space again and again and again, and make sure we're keeping our minds open, our learning open, so that we can take in all those perspectives and make sure that that's accounted for in the solutions that we come up with.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've lived in this this balance, I think, a lot of my career. And one thing I always found interesting that I've screwed up often with messaging more than anything else is in most places in the DoD, we're all the way on one side of a spectrum, right? It's like requirements generation, and we're going to tell users what to use. And if they don't like it, then too bad. This is what we're giving them. So in an effort to pull this closer to the middle of the spectrum, you talk a lot about user needs and user value and UCD and how we can get you. And that messaging, because you're trying to pull from like one end of this anchor point, it makes it sound like you're only talking about the other side of the spectrum, which makes the other people really nervous, because you're like, you can't just ask the users like, no, we know that we're trying to get to a balance here because we've been shifted all the way on one side here. One anecdote, I've used this often, but I really liked it when at Kessel Run, we were working on our first product with Jigsaw, Tanker Planner tool. And tanker planning is one part of a larger system in order to achieve kind of the AOC, the Air Operations mission. And we worked really hard to build a product that made their jobs easier and more accurate, that sort of thing. So the quick version here is, imagine that deployed in the KAOC, there are 5 people, and their job is to build a tanker plan for the day. There's these 5 people that do 8 hours of work manually to do this job. We worked for 2 years to build this great product, and now it takes 3 people 3 hours a day to do the same job more accurately, right? So we get this information, we're out there, and we're high-fiving, and we're like kind of cheering and all these things. And then we kind of take a step back and realize, like, okay, but like the bottleneck for the next step is in the same place. Like the plan that got completed has to go to this next thing that we haven't solved for yet. So from a meta perspective, from a system perspective, we haven't solved anything, right? Those users have a better life now, right? Because they can play video games 5 hours a day. But from the perspective of the CFAC, or the person in charge of an air war, his perspective hasn't changed at all. It's the same thing. It still takes just as long for the larger system to complete their task. And I think that's a perspective where users are important, but also to take a step back and understand the kind of mission itself and the system, that sort of thing. So that was a bit of a softball, but I think it's important for us to keep hitting that as we go through. Similar question, maybe, or similar answer here. I'll start with Enrique. Here's one we hear often, sort of. We're agile. We don't really need to plan. Long-term planning isn't required. We're going to figure it out as we go.
That's a myth. Look, I'm not going to say I have not made that mistake many times, but I think it's kind of like what you said before, Adam. Sometimes, like, especially early on, we push because they're so far on one end. We're like, well, we have to fight the system, which is, that's my myth. No, you're not fighting the system. Anyway, you're pushing one end, so you go with the extreme, saying, no, we don't need all that plan, don't need all the requirements. We're agile. That's actually false. Like, to actually be agile, you have to have that vision of where you're going. You have to have a plan to get there. And there's a lot of plans. And again, it's not just planning the software, it's planning the structure, it's planning the training around the whole .MLPF, since we're in the military, or some of us used to be. There's entire planning that goes around the deployment of a new capability. And oftentimes we're so agile on the software, we totally forget there's other aspects, training, stand eval, logistics, deployment, sustainment, this whole stuff we have to do as a long-term plan, even though we might be iterating on individual features. And so, no, it's definitely, it's a myth. You have to have long-term planning as part of Agile.
Dan?
Yeah, 100%. I think Agile is just a recognition that the further you look into the future, the less you know. Like that's it, right? So like Enrique was saying, we have to plan, we have to execute a mission, we have to run a business. But we also want to recognize that change is inevitable. We want to design for change. I always, when we talk about planning, I always think of people when they talk about Agile, they say fail fast, which I absolutely hate, because that kind of it sets the tone that like failure is the point, right? Let's fail and let's do it quickly, which is wrong. The point is to reduce the risk of failure and reduce the cost of failure. So make small decisions and adjust so that you're not the cost of risk is not catastrophic. You don't have this 2 or 5 or 10 year plan that you can't adjust because of some failure 2 months in or whatever.
Rachel?
I'll give a little bit more of a perspective from an acquisition side, because I am an acquisitions officer, and then I guess I dabble on the side as a designer, since it's not an AFSC. But I think that I completely agree. We, especially in our career field, I think we won't be able to continue without a plan. But it's what that plan looks like, it's how that plan is executed, and it's the ability to, when from a team level, to make that team understand that if something happens that changes the plan, that is okay, maybe, because a lot of the time, and some of that might come into contracting world, and that is something that a program office has to work on. When we talk about Agile, we're not necessarily just talking about the development, we're talking about the acquisition side as well. And I'm not the expert on that. I know we have some great people on the line too who have a lot of experience there. But that when we talk about the plan, it's I completely agree. It's not just about the development. It's about everything that is going to happen for this program, for that unit. When we are able to deliver higher for the Air Force, or for that service that you're delivering towards, and it's the work that kind of has to at least be visible. So that everyone can have some idea of what's going on. They have responsibilities, they have things that they have to work on. It's kind of what keeps any team going, organized, kind of moving forward in the same direction. So that's all I would add.
Rachel, can I follow up here? So the majority, sorry, I know I was sharing my screen the whole time, so my bad. The in the 350th, right? The work that we do here in this group, it's not all like strictly software based, right? So there's a lot of like hardware based systems, like hardware or, you know, in the loop type of systems and that sort of thing. Like, how does kind of these approaches to Agile still apply to systems that may not be strictly software based?
Oh, that's a good question. So I would say from a design perspective, we're looking at almost like the system, the service design as a whole. And as we're taking a look at the whole project or the whole mission and everything that goes into what will make this mission successful, you can find things that might be gaps. You can find things that might be inefficient in behind the scenes. You could find it later in support services. You could find it in you can uncover it everywhere. And I think you called it out. Some pieces of that could be hardware. But I think that as we are learning all of that, we're bringing these people together to kind of understand, okay, if we're going to modernize the software, what does that mean for everything else? And the sooner, I think what we learned at Kessel Run was the sooner we talk, the sooner that others understand if we're modernizing the software, because I don't understand your job. I don't understand the logistics element of this. I don't understand the comm squadron element of this, because this is something that we experienced, especially when we were working on our deployment. When we brought them in, they were very open to understanding and then starting to brainstorm with us, thinking in kind of using design thinking to think about their piece of the process and how that could potentially be modernized or could potentially be improved. And when we were able to bring these people together, thinking, almost using the same thought process, and we'll call this the design thinking process, when we all kind of learned the design thinking process and were able to use it and apply it, we started to see some of those improvements happening together, and we were improving and coming together as a system of systems to think about how we can do this work better, how this mission can be effective, and how we wouldn't necessarily be leaving somebody out or leaving a whole area out if we were able to improve one part. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great take on the kind of relationship building part of it and like the kind of social engineering that needs to happen in some of these transformations and that sort of thing. Dan, any take on the kind of hardware part of that question or anything else Rachel just talked about?
Yeah, that's I agree. I think I put an asterisk on this one. I think there are probably cases where this is true, right? Where this is like the way the things we're talking about are not possible. And I'm thinking of like the International Space Station and like cases where the cost of failure is catastrophic, right? And there's nothing we can do about that. And the cost of testing, like shipping things into space to test the hardware is just not possible. So I think there's probably cases where that's true. Generally speaking, though, I don't think it is true. And I think you know, Rachel is touching on some things that are like systems of systems thinking. You know, I heard you say like hardware in the loop. I think when we're working in hardware-based systems, the mechanism here is probably to just change the way we think about how and what we're delivering. What I mean by that is there are ways to sort of apply these agile principles and DevOps principles to shipping hardware. There's like digital twin, for example. So we can test hardware, we can test things in a virtual space. You know, there's hardware in the loop testing. That's sort of like a one-for-one, let's apply software principles to hardware. I think you can also change the way you think about shipping that hardware or shipping those capabilities to new hardware. So can we partition work or can we add layers of abstraction to that hardware so that we can test some pieces as software? You know, I think of the story from last year before where we put Kubernetes on an airplane, right? Which that's cool, that's a thing we did, but we can also use that to build software that if we can trust that it works on Kubernetes, for example, and we can trust that we can put that Kubernetes cluster on a plane, we can sort of remove some of the risk of shipping hardware by adding a software abstraction to it.
Adam, I'd like to jump on one thing that's here. Yeah, this hardware question comes up all the time because the DoD is very hardware centric, which is totally fine. You know, you need capital systems. But I think when you look at hardware, when you're on the software side of the house and you look at hardware, you just have to decide, is that hardware a constraint or is a hardware enabler of your software? And neither one is right or wrong. It depends on the circumstance. The key is you have to understand what world you're operating in. So again, you know, Dan just gave the example of deploying out to aircraft. You know, you're deploying out to the U-2 sensor bay or deploying to F-16. The hardware is a constraint. You're not going to switch out that hardware. You have to comply with it. So you have to build software for that hardware. On the other hand, things like the AOC weapon system, you should be designing the best hardware and best software, best architecture for the mission, and then you buy the right hardware to enable it, which is a mistake we made early on where we actually felt the hardware was a constraint. We bought the server racks and they sat unused, and we kind of built towards an architecture that was actually irrelevant in the modern cloud era. So it's understanding from day one, is your hardware a constraint or do you choose your hardware to enable you? And in that case, hardware is very agile. And I've seen space companies who are switching out their processors, switching out their hardware, switching out their buses on every few months as their software is getting better because they're not constrained by the hardware. They're just finding the right hardware to do what their mission, their sensors, their software needs them to do.
That's great. So like all this stuff sounds wicked hard to me, right? There's like a lot of work. You mentioned earlier, Enrique, I liked your answer to the talent management question. It was like, yeah, this is a reality. If you don't want to put the work in, sure. I think all of that feels like that sometimes. So my question here is more like, is this even worth it? So my statement here is the military doesn't really have the same needs for agility and speed that commercial companies do. Are we all just wasting our time here? Enrique, I'll start back with you.
I know you said the answer is supposed to be it's a myth or it's not. This one is it depends. Not everything should be agile. Not everything needs constant change. And I think there's a misnomer, I'm going to use the air quotes, in the innovation space in the Department of Defense right now that everything has to be rethought, sticky note everything and let's change the world. Actually, I don't think that's the case. I think agility is necessary in the defense space, but not everywhere. And so with limited resources, limited time, limited political capital to change a system, we have to choose those areas that do need that change, who do need that constant refresh of ideas or software or technology and figure out the best ones. And so actually, I'll give an example, EW, right? I'm going to speak in an area I do not know well about, but it is something I've been thinking about a long time. If you had said, hey, let's do Agile on EW 10 years ago, I don't think it would have been the right time and definitely not the right first use cases. The DoD is moving into this whole software development stuff. But I think we're at a point now like, hell yeah. Yeah, we've seen it in the commercial world. The DoD is ready for it. We have the type of talent. And so does the DoD need Agile? Yeah, probably in a lot of places, but there's a prioritization of what happens first, what areas are needed, what areas need commercial innovation to drive it. And there are some areas where actually the DoD innovation might drive the commercial, but I think in general, we're in a world where we have to see that the commercial side knows how to do this, and then we kind of jump in on that.
Rachel?
Hey, button. Yeah, I would tend to agree. I guess I think I would have said, if just reading the statement, I would have said that's a myth, because I think in the nature of our mission that we do in the military, I think that dependent on the threat and what that work or mission could be, then absolutely could it mean that we have that need to better our systems, better our ability to operate, then absolutely. But yes, I agree. It's easy to say that because we know there's so much more that goes into even the support, the championship for being able to do that work. So that's how kind of I thought about the question.
Yeah, it's great. I tend to think about this as like, how do we give ourselves the optionality needed to make fast decisions in the future that we don't even know we have to make yet? So there are just scenarios where like, even if somebody doesn't feel worth the investment or whatever now, like we don't know that in 3 years we're not going to wish that we had the opportunity to use that option to. So there's just like, how do you give people who have to make leadership decisions and strategic decisions more tools in the toolbox? And that just takes some work to do sometimes, I think. All right, so what I want to do here, Chris, I see you. We're going to get to you in 1 second. I asked each of the panelists to come up with their own myth that they wanted to, that they've either dealt with in their careers or they are interested in, and then kind of debunk it themselves. So, Dan, I'll start with you to give yours.
Yeah, mine is actually relevant. The biggest myth I've encountered in the last 20 years is that we can't do that here for some reason, right? We can't release on demand. We can't automate our security process. This sort of attitude of like why we as an organization have unique constraints or unique requirements that prohibit us from being agile or designing for change. And this is, I think, the first thing that I like to attack. You know, at a high level, this is like exactly what you were just talking about. You know, companies like AWS and Meta and Google and whoever else, these companies are doing this to make money, right? They're doing it to make a buck. They are shipping software to production, to users, on demand, instantly. And I think we, in government, not just the DoD, we have maybe I'm going to say higher calling and wince as I say it, but we have a mission, right? We're trying to win a war, or we're trying to protect U.S. interests. Even, you know, in the cases of civilian agencies like GSA, USCIS, we're trying to provide a service to citizens. So I think it's a better use case. It's a better story than trying to make money to do it. And I think the myth of we can't the myth is that we can't, because we are, and we can do it securely, and we can do it quickly. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. Rachel, what is yours?
So I definitely instantly thought about UX and design because I've gotten to see from the Air Force side and working with stakeholders who have never heard of user experience or design. And then now I've also gotten to experience on the Space Force side. So I love that this is absolutely universal, but I'm sure many of you have heard people say UX or design is just, well, that's just asking users what they want. And we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I say it this way because I've heard people say this. I've heard people critique the profession because of this, and it's to me just a sad, unfortunate misunderstanding of what this work, when done well, when done how it can be done, and what it can produce. So as we kind of talked about when we were talking about just focusing solely on user feedback, there are so many other potential users, maybe secondary, tertiary, there's other systems, there's other things to think about. And when you're talking to one type of user, one type of person, they really might not know everything, and that's totally fine. That's not their job to. So when we talk about the UX profession, hopefully we're starting to learn this, and we're starting to build this up a little bit more, this awareness of what this job can be. We're really looking to understand their user experience, their experience. So what goes into that experience, the factors like things that impact their behavior, how they show up to work every day, their motivations, their interests, their demands that are coming from external. So maybe that's where that leadership perspective is really important to go to next. But from a specific user, they have that pressure to think about as well. Even the learning curve of having to show up to work to potentially take on a new task. How does that individual, how does their brain work? How do they go about that? We could even get into accessibility and things like that with, we can start to talk about color blindness and things like that can be very specific or tailored to a certain environment. If they're working in kind of a darker environment, or if they're working late shifts, or they're working during the day. All of those factors are what the UX designer has to understand, has to take into consideration to build a good user experience. So a good example I can think of, at least for Kessel Run, was when we were working with Buckley Air Force Base. The users actually, most usually think, hey, when they're working with acquisitions, they need to bring a laundry list, like a nice to have list, or just, hey, we need to be prepared. Working with our MAGCOMs, we've got this list of requirements. This is everything we know we need. We've vetted it, we've talked about it in endless meetings. This is what, if you build this, perfect, that will do the job. And so that they came prepared, ready to kind of show us something like that. And as we were able to take them through some design exercises, which I'm sure you're going through yourselves, defining personas, mapping that user journey, taking it and expanding it even into kind of being able to reveal further details through things like service blueprinting even, we were able to show them inefficiencies, things that they had just gotten used to, that were actually the biggest maybe areas where they could take time back and start to actually focus on their mission. And so in working with that team specifically, they had gotten so used to their turnover having to take 2 hours every day. Who has 2 hours to just talk to someone and try and make sure that they can pass on all the information? And sometimes it was taking longer, so people weren't even going home on time. And they're working shifts, so that just ends up just piling up and really affecting the organization as a whole and their ability to do their mission, especially when they're tasked with communicating with other entities. So that was just one example where we were able to kind of like point out, hey, you didn't even call this out because you're so used to it, and that's okay. But hey, on top of all these other things, here's our approach, here's how we are looking at it, and this is what we found. And they were so excited because we did our job well, and we were able to point out, hey, we don't just care about you being able to press a button and make sure that data is sent to a certain place and that it is received. We care that you can show up from the minute you walk into the office. You can show up and you can be successful in what you're trying to do, and hopefully leave and go home on time. So that was my big myth. I want to be able to shout this because I feel like people don't understand this, but it's important.
Yeah, I think you just told like the Air Force, like the story of being an airman in a lot of, which is unfortunate, right? It's this idea that, you know, when you get treated like the person who happens to be in cell D14 on somebody's spreadsheet, like then that Stockholm syndrome is a reality for you because you don't feel like anything can change. So you just deal with it. So like we've had how many times we go to ask people for their like, what are your pain points? They're like, nah, things are great. You're like, I just watched you sit in a chair for 3 hours waiting for this to download. Like, doesn't it feel weird to you? It's like, no, this is the Air Force, right? So I think what you're talking about is a change to treating people like humans, which is a great change. I actually think we've seen progress here in the last handful of years. Enrique was a great champion for UX design, which was really important coming from his position at the time, because usually that isn't where that comes from, right? It's like a bottom-up thing generally. Now we're seeing a CXO of the Air Force with Cole Whitall. And so I think it's slow maybe, but there's opportunities and change happening, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah, and Rachel, there is a designer career field. It's 16K, 16 kilo for officers. Look it up.
I need you to talk to all the other people in the Air Force and tell them how to use it.
Yeah, there's just change your billet over to a 16 kilo, hire people, and there's a design subspecialty within that. Anyway.
Major Mobley's on the line, Enrique. I think he'd love to tell you his experience with trying to use that and how it's.
I didn't say the experience was good. I'm just saying it exists. It's in the document.
I call that a myth.
I've actually met a couple 16 kilo officers, which is actually pretty awesome. Okay, so my myth. So I have a lot of myths out there. Like the one, I'm not going to talk about this one. The one I would love to spend like an hour talking about is Agile is inherently insecure. That is one of the biggest challenges that I faced during my career and I still face now. And it's one of my favorite, like I could sit for hours over beer and debate relative security of traditional methodologies versus Agile methodologies. But we don't have enough time for that one today. So the other myth that is always out there, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is to be Agile, to be innovative, to deliver capabilities, we have to fight the bureaucracy. It's not true. And I think one of the worst things we've done is put forward this notion that we're rebels fighting against the system. I'll be honest, I could be skewed because I was a colonel. I'm kind of proud of the system. I'm proud of the bureaucracy. And it's not about fighting against the system. It's about educating the system. It's not about being a rebel. It's about being a revolutionary and changing the hearts and minds. The fact is, this is what we call the frozen middle, we call the bureaucracy in these pejorative terms. These are good Americans just trying to do their job in the way that they are trained to do it. Yes, there are people out there that say no just to say no. Got it. We all know they exist. They exist in all walks of life. They exist in companies, not just in the government. And those people, yes, maybe you have to go around them, go through them, ignore them. But the reality, the majority of what we call that frozen middle, the bureaucracy, are people just trying to do the job the way they were trained. And so our job in being agile, our job in driving these new methodologies, our job in driving rapid delivery capability is to help educate on why do these methodologies work? Why does user-centered design work? Why is agile inherently in many ways more secure than traditional because of speed and security? There's the correlation. It's not a balance or an offset. It's actually a correlation between speed and security. Why is this actually inherently more cost effective based off of the requirement system? So you have to understand the person who's saying no, why are they saying no? There's probably a really good reason for it. There's probably policy reasons, probably baggage reasons. And your job is not go in there and tell them they're wrong. Your job is not fight the system, fight the man, violate the rules. If you're involved in this process, especially in the leadership position, your job is to go in there, help them rewrite policy, help educate them on other ways of doing business. Do a dog and pony show and show them how things work. Go meet with their teams and make sure you understand their inputs from their staffs to understand why they are concerned. And so, so bottom line, the biggest myth, we got to fight the bureaucracy. No, that's actually, it has set us back for years thinking that we have to fight the system. No, we are part of the system. We should be proud of being part of the system. We have to change this because here's the other thing. Bureaucracies provide stability. Once you change it to in a manner that's good, in a way that you like executing in, it's going to be sticky because it's going to take someone else's effort to change it back. And most people don't want to put in the effort. So again, it's okay to actually create the bureaucracy you want. Just recognize you're part of it.
That was great. It's something I've struggled with my entire career and still do in a lot of ways. Like the idea of when you have your head in this mindset, all of a sudden the person is an enemy. So you're constantly in the athletic position trying to figure out how to navigate whatever this volley is. And in reality, you could just, figure it out in a much easier way. So you'd be more proactive and actually do a better job of moving forward rather than figuring out how to defend against something that's coming that may be just a figment of your imagination. So that's a great point for sure.
And real quick, Adam, your body language right there was perfect. And let me explain. You said you start off with the defensive athletic stance, but then you kind of open up. It is that same thing. When you're talking to someone who's opposed to you, don't get a defensive staff and fight. Open up, let them punch you in the face. Let them take their shots. It's not going to hurt you. You'll survive emotionally, physically. It doesn't really matter. But now you've learned what really matters to them. And now you can find a way to address their actual concerns. When you're defensive and you're arguing back against their notions, you're not actually listening to what really the underlying root causes are, the root problems are. And so I love your bottom line. Yeah, you just got to open up. Just take the shot and then respond.
Good. This feels like therapy to a degree. So
it is. This is therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Chris, let's go to you and see what questions. You can use whatever format you want. We're kind of myth or not.
Right. Hi, my name's Chris. I'm the designer for Wavelength. So I'm someone who recently retrained from aircraft maintenance to work as a designer for Wavelength. So my question kind of ties into developing the skill set for designers who aren't familiar with agile framework who come work with us at Wavelength. I've had the benefit of working with Morgan and Sagely for developing my skills and talents. So I'm curious, Rachel, if you have any advice on developing that for other designers in the DoD who may not have the benefit of a team like Sagely.
Yes. And I worked with Morgan back before she wasn't even a designer. So I love that I'd love to see Morgan's kind of career grow. And I'm so happy to now see someone working with Morgan. That's so great. And also congrats on making that transition. So whenever I get approached from active duty interested, their interest has been piqued about what is this design, what is this role that kind of can focus on the user, and how does it apply to a team? How do I bring this skill set in? How do I grow this skill set? While you're active duty, there are definitely some resources. I know Digital University is trying to build out some more free content that really works on kind of building out your overall understanding. There's a lot of boot camps out there. There's a lot of overviews out there that'll go into UCD 101, kind of what it means to be user experience. But a lot of also what we do comes into the interaction piece. And that's kind of where I'm not necessarily seeing as much content yet that's as free to us, but I do know that there are a few resources online. Definitely there's a lot of resources if you go the more kind of traditional academic route. And then there's a lot of communities. And I think that's where I would point, and where I typically point a lot of people. So a lot of communities in whatever social media you're in, either on Instagram, there's design meetups, there's design groups for specific cities. And then even in LinkedIn is really good for this, where the same communities exist there, but there's individuals who all they want to do is teach. They want to teach they want to talk about different design practices and how to apply the kind of more user-centered design principles to discovery work and that research. But there are also so many people who want to also teach you the design principles of why certain interactions might be more successful with specific users than others. That gets very technical to the design field. So I would definitely say keep looking for those free resources online. Norman Nielsen Group also is really good about taking some of these concepts that are very technical to the design field and chunking them down into bite-sized pieces, videos, any kind of medium that your learning preference kind of probably leans towards. They have taken it into a small article, longer kind of dissertation, and then even just like smaller, shorter tidbit videos. And it's all accessible online. So if you have something you're curious about, I keep a running list all the time of like, oh, like, is this an idea or is this a concept? Like, and then I just go Google. And definitely be aware that designers in general are opinionated, and we sometimes disagree on what the right application could be. So some of those more institutions like Norman Nielsen, IDEO, some of those resources might be a little bit more the place to start. And then as you start to gain more experience and you see how it's working in application, go back to those areas. And that's really where those forums and things on social media, LinkedIn, things like that can help. Also just get some of those experiences out there, see how other people have seen things applied and what they've learned, because it is definitely something that we're growing in. Trends are changing all the time. And it's really always about what are we learning from how the user is interacting with this, how it impacted someone, what are we learning from that? And then that ends up changing some principle that we all thought was, oh, this is the one that we know is true. So that's what I'd say. Definitely look towards the free ones first, though. I feel like there's so much out there that it's definitely there to be used.
Yeah, it's good advice even for non-designers. One thing I would add though is like a lot of times in these communities, you'll find yourself with like designers who are like commercial experience seems vastly different than defense experience, right? So you might be like, well, this is a product marketing thing or a pricing thing. But I will tell you that learning more about these other parts of the fields, it's just language at the end of the day. The things that get people to pay for a thing are the same things that get adoption from an airman in, wherever they're at. So like all these things are important. So to expand your breadth a little bit is a good practice. Enrique, I kind of want to follow up here with you, if you don't mind. I think that in the early days of standing up, Kessel Run, you made the decision and your team made a decision to really invest in things like enablement and building people's skills and that sort of thing. Do you have any how did you think about that? And like, marry that up with other investments you had to make and that sort of thing? Like, I'm just kind of curious how you thought about that strategically.
I think initially it wasn't even a strategic decision. Initially, it was a decision like, we don't have any skills. The only way to do this is through enablement. And so honestly, I think you were probably one of the few people who came in who had some level of training into the early team. And so early on, it was not a strategic decision. But as we move forward, it ended up being an actual strategic decision, deciding as we bring on new teams, we're going to force, like every single team is going to have enablement, because we need, and part of it was for technical skills, but part of it's also for cultural fit. And by the way, I'm seeing that in my company right now. Like, there's nothing different between the commercial world and the government when it comes to things like this. I'm seeing in my company right now, we're going through, we raised our round, we're hiring a bunch of people, and people come from different engineering backgrounds. Again, and when I say broad engineers, PMs, designers, different engineering backgrounds. And you have to make sure that culturally their engineering practices, they gel. Not that you don't bring in, not that you abandon new ideas, but you have to make sure that you're not just bringing in a team that says, I only do Agile safe, I refuse to do XP or whatever. Like, so part of the enablement is not just the training, it's to build the team. And look, this is the military, right? This is basic training. This is IFT, this is follow-on training, this is your whole stand eval. Like, we do this in the government all the time. And what we're doing is we're building cohesion with teams, not just getting people better. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of enablement services.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks. Troy.
So I know I listened to your when you were on Defense Unicorns podcast, and you mentioned when you first stood up Kessel Run, you wanted to do it organically with active duty people. Like we've kind of hinted at, we had all of our officer billets at 16K, weren't able to fill them. Do you have any recommendations on like actually getting the active duty people into the organization? I know you had like a general to assist you getting those people in there. Do you have like hacks for that, or any advice or recommendation on how to get those people that have the skill set into the organization?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So first of all, just for people who did not listen to that podcast, the reason we went entirely active duty first is I was trying to prove a point. Because the traditional norm was all contractors. So I'm like, okay, let's prove a point. Let's just grab 6 airmen and see what we can do with military only. Now, obviously, by the time we got to app number 2, we brought in our first contract or civilian, Adam. By the time we got to app number 3, I think we started having contractors. So the whole idea of going to military, it's not that I never argued that all software development should be military. I did it to prove a point that the talent exists and the capabilities exist for us to do it. I do believe that most software development in the government should be government-led. In other words, the government cannot abdicate its role as the system integrator. We cannot hire a single contractor to be the system integrator. A government person needs to be the system integrator to drive the collection of military, civilian, contracted personnel to drive towards a mission. But then your question about how do you get the right military people in? It is a trade-off. It is a commander's decision. And what that means is a commander must decide what is more important to them. Is it more important that they have another maintenance troop, another cyber troop, another, you name whatever career field? Or is it more important that they have somebody that is doing the mission? Because you're not going to get an extra billet. Like, it won't happen. You can try, it'll take you a long time to get, and I've got extra billets all over the DoD. It takes a while, and a commander has to put basically their whole life into getting extra billets. So what it really is you must decide what is the most critical positions that must be military. And then you make that trade-off and you convert those billets to those 16Ks. You convert those billets to whatever career field you want, knowing that you're going to have to convert the other positions to either civilian or contractor, or you just do without. And it's different pots of money. So it's not like you can switch a billet and then suddenly the government gives you, okay, you switch to military billet, well, here's money to hire backfill. It's just not going to happen. So this is a commander's decision. And if you at a lower level trying to justify to the commander, you better be able to say, if I convert this billet, can I do without that other billet for quite a while until you can either hire into it or figure out how to do the job in a more efficient manner. And again, same thing, commercial world, there's no difference. Like when you have your payroll, You can't just hire for it. You're just going to have to make choices and trade-offs.
Thank you.
Cool. This has been great. I appreciate everybody's time. We recorded this too. I think there was a few things I'm already excited to kind of cut up and kind of use where we can and get your approval ahead of time. But there was some great advice here and perspectives. So I really appreciate that. And Enrique will probably bring you back at some point to give you an hour on agile security things. So we'll throw up that softball for you. But thanks for coming to you all, and then thanks for the folks on the line. We'll send out the recording and everything to the group. Otherwise, have a good Thursday. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.